So what's likely to happen once these steel tariffs kick in? Well, home prices are going up, especially new construction. And the affordable housing shortage, yeah, that could get worse before it gets better. So much for being an empty nester, right? I mean, at this rate, I think all our kids might be moving back in after college. But let's break down what's happening, why it matters, and what you can do to soften the blow. For starters, expect higher prices for new homes. Critical materials like nails, screws, fasteners, load-bearing beams, and rebar, just to name a few, all those are likely to increase. In addition to materials for roofing, siding, appliances, plumbing, windows, HVAC systems, it is all going up, folks. CoreLogic estimates home construction material prices could increase by as much as 10%. So if a new home costs $400,000, a 10% increase means you can tack on an additional $40,000 to the price. We may also see housing supply start to shrink. If building homes gets more expensive, builders aren't just gonna eat those costs. They'll slow down projects, or they might cancel some altogether, and you kind of already know where that leads. Less inventory equals higher prices equals more competition. So a shortage of new homes can also drive up the cost of pre-existing homes. And here's where it gets even messier. Rising home prices could push inflation even higher. And if inflation stays up, mortgage rates stay high, or at worst, they could get higher. And don't think because you're renting that you're safe. Like, this could be bad news for you too. Steel is used in apartment buildings as well. So if steel gets more expensive, fewer apartments may get built. Fewer apartments equals more competition for housing equals higher rent. And guess what? Some renters will just say, man, screw this. If rent is gonna be this high, I might as well just buy a house instead, which that pushes the demand for homes even higher, making homes cost more. So why is all this happening? Well, the exact date kind of keeps shifting, but as of now, in April of 2025, the Trump administration is set to impose a 25% tariff on all foreign steel. Now, what does that really mean? It just means that there's going to be a tax Americans have to pay if they want to buy foreign steel. So why do this? Well, honestly, he's got a few good reasons, or at least they seem that way on the surface. Number one is national security. What if we go to war? Right now, we buy more steel from Canada than any other nation. But suppose we started beefing with those boys, or worse, a war broke out between the two of us. We need steel for munitions, tanks, artillery, and all kinds of defense production, but Canada would probably stop selling us steel if we were turning around and using it against them. Or maybe it's not even about us. Maybe Canada gets tired of Greenland's mouth and decides to go up there and shut those boys up. If Canada was at war, they need their own steel for tanks, weapons, infrastructure, which means we might be out of luck if we're still heavily dependent on them for steel. And it's not just military use. Steel is in everything. It's in bridges, power grids, transportation, buildings, even the aluminum that's used in things like our cell phones. So depending too much on foreign steel, it's not the smartest long-term move. The other big reason for the tariffs? Boosting U.S. manufacturing and creating more jobs in the United States. Every dollar spent on foreign steel is a dollar supporting a foreign steel worker instead of an American one. And it's not just about jobs. That money also leaves our economy entirely. So in theory, buying more American steel means keeping money in America and supporting American jobs and just making our overall economy stronger. And lastly, we gotta talk about our trade deficit. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's real simple. It just means we buy more stuff from other countries than what they buy from us. And that's not great, because when we send money out of the country, it's not circulating our economy, supporting American businesses, and supporting American workers. And if that keeps happening, then American companies will start to shut down, American jobs start to disappear, and foreign competitors kind of take over. So what's Trump's plan? Simple. If you buy foreign steel instead of American steel, you're paying a 25% tax, no exceptions. And that sounds like a reasonable solution to a serious problem, right? Well, hold up, slow your roll. It ain't that damn cut and dry. For starters, per the American Iron and Steel Institute, 70 to 90% of the steel consumed in the United States already comes from domestic steel mills. So we're already buying mostly from ourselves. And here's the thing, American companies aren't buying foreign steel just for the hell of it. Not all steel is the same. Different countries excel at making different kinds of steel. Sometimes it's just because of their natural resources. So not all specialty steels are widely available and widely made in the US. So if a US company needs a specific grade of steel that's not readily available stateside, they're getting hit with a 25% tax for no reason. And that's not protecting or adding any American jobs. That's just making it more expensive to do business. Another reason businesses buy foreign steel? Price. Sometimes it's just cheaper to buy steel from a foreign supplier. And let's be real, we can't really blame businesses for wanting to lower their costs. And it's not just about the price, sometimes it's about availability. Domestic steel production is driven by demand. So when demand spikes happen, shortages tend to happen. So why would we tax a company for buying foreign steel when the American steel they need just isn't readily available? This isn't just a hypothetical issue either. We've seen this happen before during economic booms. Now you might think none of this stuff matters if our national security is at stake, which I agree, that's a fair point. But here's the thing, we're not reliant on any one country. We purchase steel from Canada, Brazil, Mexico, South Korea, Japan, Germany, and even a small portion from China. So even if one country was to cut us off, we have plenty of other resources to fall back on. Could we become 100% self-reliant? Sure, but it would take time and a huge amount of capital. We can't just flip a switch and get new manufacturing plants online overnight. And it will most certainly come with a price hike on many of the things that we buy. And here's where it really doesn't add up. Per the US Census Bureau, foreign steel is only about $34 billion of a $918 billion trade deficit. That's less than 4%. So making Americans pay significantly higher prices for goods to barely move the needle on our trade deficit, that doesn't really seem worth it. But what about jobs? Americans desperately need good paying jobs right now. And if we make more steel here, that should mean more jobs for American workers, right? Well, here's the problem with that. We're producing nearly the same amount of steel today as we did in the 1990s. But in 1990, the industry had 257,000 workers. Today, about 131,000. So the workforce has been cut in half. Why? Well, simple, technology. Today's worker can produce twice as much as a worker 35 years ago, and it's far less labor intensive. Many of the jobs that remain are more technical and require specialized skills in robotics, AI, and automation. So humans are less involved with the manual tasks, which actually sounds great, right? That means Trump's steel tax is going to create more specialized, high-paying jobs for Americans. Oh, except for one huge problem. America isn't doing a great job at creating highly skilled and educated workers. Per the National Center for Education stats, nearly 9% of Americans don't even finish high school. Only about 35% have a college degree, and less than 14% have a graduate or professional degree. So we may not even have the workforce to do tomorrow's steel jobs. And the Trump administration's education policy, yeah, that's not helping at all. They've made it very clear they want to dismantle the Department of Education and send education back to the states. And his pick to lead the Department of Education, Linda McMahon, has already outlined what she deems as the Department of Education's final mission. The Department of Ed provides financial aid for college students and some of the funding for the universities themselves. So eliminating the Department of Education will be a huge loss, especially if it reduces access to federal student aid. Without it, students will have to rely on private banks or their states for help. But most states can't fit that into their budgets. We already have states that receive more federal dollars in aid than what they pay in federal taxes. So if those states are already relying on federal money for their budgets, how are they suddenly going to start funding college tuition? Answer: they won't. Not to mention, our K-12 public schools across the nation get approximately 11% of their funding from the Department of Education, and it will be left up to the states to fill that gap. And let's be honest, few, if any, will be able to match the federal funding numbers. And guess who gets hit the hardest? Public schools in low to moderate income areas. Less funding equals fewer resources, equals larger class sizes, equals more kids left behind. Plus, if the universities lose federal funding, they'll have to make up the difference somehow, which probably means higher tuition or more expensive fees and fewer grants and scholarships. So we can see the cost of education rise while students lose access to grants and affordable financing. The steel jobs of tomorrow, they won't be people making steel. They'll be people coding, overseeing, and maintaining the machines and robots that make the steel. And guess what? Most Americans won't be qualified to do it. If we gut education, how exactly are we going to train the workforce for highly technical, specialized jobs? But here's the odd thing. They seem to know that most Americans aren't ready for these jobs. Now, limiting immigration helped get a lot of voters on Trump's side, but there seems to be one kind of immigration that his administration is actually pretty fond of, and that's H-1B visas. H-1Bs are visas for highly educated immigrants who have a job offer for a specialty occupation in the United States. Now, these are typically high-paying jobs in science or technology, engineering, and mathematics. And there were some big names in Trump's orbit that pissed off his base face when they took to social media to defend H-1B visas. Vivek Ramaswamy took a shot at Americans, saying, "A culture that celebrates the prom queen over the math Olympiad champ or the jock over the valedictorian will not produce the best engineers." And Elon Musk, whose companies use a ton of H-1B visas, piggybacked on that sentiment by posting on X that there's a dire shortage of extremely talented and motivated engineers in America. But Donald Trump was seemingly unfazed by the backlash. He came out and said he was a big believer in H-1B visas and that it was a great program. And then he took it even further. He also appointed Indian-born Sriram Krishnan to be the White House advisor on AI. And he's since come out and said, we need to remove the cap on H-1B visas from $85,000 per year to unlimited. So let me get this straight. We're gonna tax American companies 25% on foreign steel so we can create more steel jobs in America that we may need to fill with highly educated immigrants, because we're also gonna be making education less accessible for an already undereducated American workforce. What the fuck? So how do you insulate yourself from this? Well, if you're in the market for a home, I suggest you run and get it now. If your timeline is a year or more away from now, you really need to reevaluate whether you can move that up. Because if these policies push us towards recession, that might drive the cost of some goods down, but don't expect home prices to just drop to the floor. This isn't like 2008, folks. Back then, home prices were artificially inflated because almost anyone could get a loan. And once the banks turned off the faucet, home prices kind of crashed overnight. But this time, prices will be rising due to real supply and cost issues, shortages in housing supply, and higher building costs. And that's not gonna change overnight. But there's one thing a recession will do, and that's drive down interest rates. That's why you buy the house now while it's likely as cheap as it's gonna get, and then refinance it once rates drop. That way your housing expenses become more affordable over time while it's becoming more expensive for everyone else that's been sitting on the sidelines. Now, if you have credit challenges, let's start fixing those right now. Be sure to watch my video on the ultimate cheat code to improve your credit score quickly. And always talk to a loan officer before deciding for yourself that you won't qualify. We often look at your situation and find ways to work around obstacles that you didn't even know were possible. The first step is always to apply, which you can easily do that on my website. I'll drop a link in the description for you guys. If you have general questions about getting a home loan, you can drop them in the comments, or you can request a one-on-one call for me at www.vawithed.com. And let me know in the comments what you guys think about Trump's tariffs. Is the cost to Americans worth what we stand to gain? And since YouTube thinks you'll like this video, be sure to check this one out next.